Wonderful keynote this morning by Glyph. That point he made about the cathedral and needing the city around it in order to finish the cathedral was a great point. Really enjoyed that. I happen to be up against the two talks in the conference that I wanted to see. I appreciate you coming to this talk. If you get up and leave and go to the other talk, I won't be offended. We have 65 slides and 24 minutes now. Let's go. We're going to talk about customizing Sphinx. I am the developer advocate for PyCharm. Best job in the universe. I count my lucky stars every day. I get to tell people in Virginia where I live. I work for a Czech company founded by Russians out of my basement in Virginia for the Boston office. My boss is an Iranian living in Spain. So they all think CIA. I go back a ways in Python. 1992 was my origin story in Python. I give another talk called Python 1994 about the first Python workshop. So some of the stuff you're going to hear today is definitely Clint Eastwood and get off my grass. This is an alternative presentation format for me. I'm using a different way of delivering this, and it's also unusual for me. This talk has content. Usually I just tell jokes. So I will try my best to get to the end. We'll see how far we get. And I was asked to mention I won't take questions during it, which is weird for me. I like the interactive, but we'll talk afterwards if you have any questions. Raise your hand. I'd like to find out a little bit about the audience. Have you ever typed anything into Sphinx, written a document, whatever? Raise your hand if you've ever used Sphinx in any way. All right, cool. Let's get that number down a little bit. How many of you have ever edited a conf.py and customized that loving Sphinx site that you have? 1, 1.5, right, 2. Let's see if you survive the cut on this one. No? All right, good. We're going to cover all of this today along with a little history lesson on the joys of this thing called Sphinx. We are going to talk about Sphinx as a documentation tool. We're also going to talk about it as a platform, not just an application, an engine that you can plug into and do surprising things. We're going to start with the simple. I'm editing a conf.py file. How hard could that be? Not too hard. Then we're going to go into the normal. I'm going to try and override that little thing. And then we're going to go into the hard. By the end of this, we're going to write an extension in Sphinx. All of this is available in a repo that I'll have the URL up for in a second. What is this Sphinx thing? Well, the cool kids these days call them static site generators. So if you ever used Jekyll, you ever used Hugo, you ever used any of these other systems like Gatsby, a new one, it takes dynamic input, spews a bunch of static HTML that is then simple to deliver at high speeds. Traditionally, it's thought of as Python's documentation tool. Read the docs, for example, host Sphinx in the cloud kind of situation. But it can do more than that. For example, there's a Sphynx extension called a blog, which lets you do a blog on top of Sphinx. So you can think of that more like a static site generator. I heart Sphinx. I'm holding the flame for it, baby, because it's got some things you don't see out there. One small example, rich and interesting linking, not just between documents, but to a spot in a document. And if you screw it up, it will tell you your links are broken. It will look at both ends of the system and report that. And Sphinx is weird and crazy and old, like some of us. And it sits on top of something that was old before the thing below it was old, before Moses was old. And we're going to go do a little bit of diving through all that. When I say it's old, this is what I mean. Markdown. Why don't you do Markdown? Well, why didn't Markdown do restructured text? Because restructured text came out before Markdown. But have you ever wondered about the re in restructured text? As if there was something before restructured text called, shockingly, structured text? My colleague at Zope, Jim Fulton, this is him in 1996 announcing structured text. So yeah, Markdown, we were already in the second year of our second generation when you were born. Not that we're bitter about it. Let's get into the first thing, configuration, the simple, the normal, and the hard. We're going to talk about the simple part. We're going to paint within the lines. We're going to edit the comp file and do the things that Sphinx tells us this is simple to do. We're going to edit a configuration file, rebuild our Sphinx, see the change, and then we're going to take a look at the side we care most about, HTML generation, and we're going to look at some of those knobs. We're going to edit some of those knobs, rebuild, and see the change. So when you get started with Sphinx, you get a configuration file in your project, and it's called the conf.py file, and it has some information, for example, the name of your project. It also has some other kinds of information which might be a little bit more interesting, like the HTML static path. Well, what is this? It gets a little bit interesting. Let me go back. We'll talk about this variables affecting HTML generation later. And then, because I know all of you, every morning, wake up and think, today is the day that I generate man pages. Sphinx is a tool that lets you generate different kinds of output, man pages, PDF, LaTeX, etc., that can be managed from within the conf file. There are knobs for those. So let's take a look at a simple customization. Let's say my site looks like this, and I change this project title here, and I edit it to have this value. And then I rebuild Sphinx, and then the thing on the left, the project title area, changes to the new value, the knob that I edited in the comp file. Very simple, normal, boring configuration for customizing Sphinx. Let's go a little bit deeper into this thing called the HTML theme. The HTML theme is a major subsystem in Sphinx, a first-class citizen. We'll take a look at it later. When you install your Sphinx, you are getting a built-in theme called Alabaster, which is the default. And it's the one that most things look like. But if you use Read the Docs, there is a theme for Read the Docs called Sphinx RTD theme. So this comp file is using Alabaster, which is bundled with Sphinx. And there's the setting for it. And then I can do configuration for that theme itself. This comment indicates that the value below HTML theme options, a dictionary that's commented out, there are options for Alabaster. So now we're just starting to get into this big, crazy-ass universe called Sphinx. I can configure the engine, the platform, and I can configure an add-on, an extension, a Sphynx extension called Alabaster. And this is the HTML theming support. It is, like many things in Sphinx, a series of conventions of magic that we've all agreed to over the years. If you put this thing in this special place, this other thing will come along later, pick it up, walk over, and hand it to Sphinx. Some of these standards are defined in documentation. Some of these standards, though, in the layer of the stack that gets down to docutils 1,000 years ago, some of these are enforced in software systems, like the ini file is parsed by the config parser that's standard in the Python lib. Or Jinja 2 standards. You can have blocks and includes and macros and layers and all these other things in Jinja 2, or in Python itself. So for example, some of these options are documented, not enforced, documented. Sphinx itself has some good pages about HTML theming, the subsystem of Sphinx called HTML theming. And as an example, here is how they explain how to configure the HTML theming support. Every theme is expected to ship a file called theme.conf, an INI file. Now, I talked to you about the series of different conventions. We're now in magic number 2. We were in conf.py, which is expressed in Python and enforced by Python. We're now over in an INI file, an ini file, that is enforced by config parser. And so the theme.conf defines some of the options that are available in this theme. Here is the Alabaster package. It has docs. These docs explain to you its options that it does on top of the rest of Sphinx. Does a really good job of explaining or of documenting the choices available for the knobs that you can adjust in Alabaster. But it also says documentation isn't enough, documentation gets out of date. I'm going to have this contract, this theme.conf, that's part of Sphinx's theming support. And these are the options expressed as an enforceable contract. So, for example, there is a knob called the width of the page. You can set it over in the comp file in those HTML theme options. And it will truck along all the way to the center of the lollipop, Tootsie Roll Pop, and Alabaster will pick it up. And it has a default value of 940 pixels. If you do not supply a value, that's the value that will be provided. So this is like a domain-specific language expressed in an INI file. If I go and edit that, and I change the width to 340 pixels, using the HTML theme options slot in the conf.py, rebuild my docs, and I have an embarrassingly ugly page. Now, let's have some fun. Where is this page width used? How did it spring into action? How did it get from the conf.py file into actually affecting the look of my site? In Sphinx HTML theming support, you can have a CSS file, normal, CSS, normal. You can have a CSS under T file. What might that under T mean? It means it is a templated CSS file, more specifically, a Jinja 2 magical templated file. And you open that up, and your CSS-aware editor suddenly gets mad because it's got Jinja 2 variables right in the middle of it. But here, we see theme.underPageWidth is a variable that's available in this magical CSS under T file. Alabaster's static alabaster.css under T runs through Jinja. Jinja's like, hey, I've got a value for this variable, and it inserts it. Let's make an error to see how this little segment of the universe actually enforces this contract. I'm going to set a value which doesn't exist in the theme.conf. Alabaster does not know the name of this value, so when I go and do my Sphinx rebuild, I see a warning where the system says, hey, you're painting outside of the lines. What did we see in this simple part? We stayed in the conf.py file. We adjusted the knobs that were given to us by Sphinx, and then we adjusted the knobs that were given to us by this Sphynx extension called Alabaster, which is bundled with Sphinx. And we saw a little bit of this beginning of everybody's playing by a set of structures, of conventions, in order to get along and pass values from one place to another. Now, this next segment, mistakenly labeled normal, is getting into some of the weirder aspects of all of these layers of, some would say magic, other people would say software. We're going to talk about customizing, and we're going to override a template. We're going to say, I'm rendering the Sphinx site. There's this one little spot I want to change. Everything else is good. That one little spot I want to change. That's the first thing we want to do. Second, I want to adjust the styling. I want my site to include a custom CSS file. And then third, there's some Sphynx extension out there. It looks really interesting. How do I get it, install it, and turn it on? In this case, it's an alternative theme based on Bootstrap. So let's override a template. Out of the box, you get a quick search box. It doesn't tell you how to use it, so we want to insert a paragraph, an HTML paragraph, just between the heading and the input box. So can you see the yellow? Yeah, you can. That's what we want to change. This part's tricky. The Sphinx HTML theming system is based on the Jinja 2 templating language. Sphinx itself has HTML theming support, but the thing you have to remember about Sphinx is it wants to be this universal generator. You write stuff in restructured text, and you can generate PDF, you can generate HTML, you can generate all kinds of different things, including HTML. But the HTML part of it, the HTML output, is controlled by themes, and the HTML output uses all of these different aspects, all this machinery from Jinja 2 to customize and plug together different pieces. What are some of these pieces? Jinja 2 has master templates, so child templates fill in these blocks in the master template layouts. Macros and includes and imports and all these other things are levels of indirection and pluggability inside the Jinja 2 universe. And on top of that, Sphinx then introduces some of its own head fakes. So you think you're in the right place, but actually Sphinx is like, no, it's actually over there. But by default, we'll come back to Alabaster and the default theme. And where is that box? What drew those pixels? Let's start at the top. This is the layout template, the master template for Alabaster. You go into the Alabaster package that's bundled with Sphinx, and you go look at the layout, and you're like, hey, I found the top. Maybe not. I don't even see an HTML tag, much less a header or a body. Where did all this stuff come from? So you see immediately that this is actually the child of another master template that ships with Sphinx itself called the basic layout. And it's the one that kind of defines the contract on pages in Sphinx and the names of the slots you can fill. So kind of the wireframe. So here's the spot where you put the content. Here's the spot where you can put extra stuff in the head. Here's the spot where you can put sidebars and things like that. So, okay, all right, I get it. We extend something. And then I see that it fills the content block, but even before that, I've got this block with a super. What's that? So this other head fake that includes some stuff and then my stuff. And then I'm getting down to the content, so I'm getting closer to what drew that quick search box, and it's filling some things in, but then it gets down to the else and says, oh, it's not over here. Go to the master templates block and get it from there. The super says, okay, you didn't find it, got to go over there. So let's go over there. This is the layout template in BASIC that Sphinx's Alabaster theme is extending. So we went to our parent, and now we went to our parent, our grandparent. We're going to look through this, and we're going to find the sidebar that has that quick search box. We're close. You see that it's sidebar 2. That would imply there's a sidebar 1. Sidebar 1 is a different part of the sidebar that can be displayed in other situations. And then what that's doing is sending us to a different place, a macro called sidebar parens. You're not there yet, you're over there. So I think this is like our third indirection. So here's the macro for sidebar. We're getting close. So I'm going to look along, and then I see, okay, now I'm down to here, and I'm in the new style sidebar. Pro tip, never call your thing NG, never call it new, because this was written maybe 2007, I don't know. So the old style must be pretty old. And this is the thing that draws all the boxes in the sidebar. And it's iterating over a variable called sidebar and looking for a template for each of the boxes of the configured sidebars. Sidebars? Where did that magical name come from? You can look everywhere. It certainly isn't in basic/layout.html. It's certainly not in Alabaster's layout. You can grep the source for it. You won't find it because it's actually in the HTML theme options as HTML under sidebars. A magical prefix put onto the variable that says this is in the HTML namespace. If we were in the world of Python, instead of the world of templating, we could have solved that with package namespace kinds of things, but we're not, so we used a prefix. And this is the thing that gives me the list of sidebar panels that can be iterated over and inserted there, including the search box. And so now I found the search box. I know that I found it because, as the circle shows, it's one of the default values for the sidebar. So then I go find searchbox.html in the source, and it's the original version that's used by the others is at that location under the basic theme. I copy and paste it into a magical directory called under templates, in my project directory, the same level that conf.py is at. If you put an under templates, any name in there, any named template file, something.html, will override anything anywhere else in the system. It'll override something in an extension. It'll override a file name in your theme. It'll override a file name in Sphinx itself. This is the first layer in Sphinx's magical name lookup. And this is what it looks like. And you can see that under the H3, I've added a paragraph. I paste this in there. I include everything from the thing I'm overriding and insert my one line. And with the addition of the paragraph, I rebuild my site, and I have instructions. I've overridden part of the templating system in my Sphinx project. That was easy. So as an aside, this is a rant of mine. I believe in Python. I believe in explicit's better than implicit. But this whole template side, where we try to hide Python from the HTML people, leads to all of this madness that you will never find what drew that pixel. And I believe explicit's better than implicit. And in this system of docutils, restructured text, and Sphinx, and things written on top of it, each one add a new layer of magic with a new different system for enforcing their magic. Let's go on to the next normal customization. I want to include a CSS file that gets added to the head in all of the generated HTML markup. Because I want to style that little search box of help that I just added. I did it as a paragraph class equals search-help, which means in CSS I can use a CSS specifier for it. So the solution, another magic directory, under static. If you have a file called, a directory called under static in your project, every single thing in there will be copied to the output. It may not be included, but the file will be there. So I make this file with this CSS in it. So the CSS file will be there. How do I get it into the head of my templates? Oh, sorry, no, because I included it with the special name custom. Custom.css, if it exists, automatically gets injected into the generated HTML. And then I rebuild, and I've got styled markup. I could go one step further. Let's say that, sure, I want CSS, but I want it to conform to one of the built-in styles of my theme. And in this case, my theme is Alabaster. And previously, we saw a theme.conf file with all the knobs defined by Alabaster. One of those knobs is pink, of course. And so I want my text to be pink as defined in Alabaster. I can make my CSS, my custom.css file dynamic by renaming it with the magical under T suffix. Regenerate. It becomes a Jinja 2 template, is evaluated, and I have pink help. One last thing in the normal section, installing an extension for Sphinx. We want to have a Bootstrap theme instead of the Alabaster theme. And extensions in Sphinx are Python packages in general, unless you have installed it some other way, but something that's importable. So I'm going to first pip install the package. This is the Sphinx Bootstrap theme based on Bootstrap 3. Once it is installed into my virtual environment, I need to tell Sphinx it's there so it can wire itself up. It's a Python package, but it's also a Sphynx extension. 1 minute? Wow, all right. And now your Sphynx extension looks different. There are other extensions you can add. I'm going to go through in 30 seconds writing a Sphynx extension. This lets you do rich and interesting things like register new directives in your restructured text. But you need to have a package with a setup.py that gets past the Sphinx app that you can register things with. I'm going to add an HTML theme. I'm going to connect to an event, because Sphinx has event model. And I'm going to follow this to-do example from the Sphinx docs. We're going to write an extension that does several things, such as inject a node into docutils, so the docutil tree can render it in PDF or whatever. A directive in Sphinx, so I can say .. /hello world in my restructured text. I have a magical new thing in my documents now. And then a handler that knows how to process that and convert it into some output. I advertise it as a Sphynx extension. People can come along, install it, point edit, and now our restructured text can have a new directive, which renders a page. This has been fun. You can do all of this by writing tests to make it even funner. And for even the funnest, come and talk to me at the end. Thank you very much.